Audubon is hosting. I'm Sammy Roth. I cover energy and environmental issues for the Los Angeles Times and was previously based in Palm Springs, where I wrote quite a bit about the Salton Sea. I think this is going to be a great discussion. We have a really good set of panelists here with different perspectives. They're going to have a chance to introduce themselves, but before we do that, we have a note from Miguel here about how the translation is going to work and how we're going to have live Spanish-English translation going on.
Hi, thank you, Sammy. And I just have a brief announcement in regards to the interpretation. From the interpreter, to use the interpretation feature, you can listen in English. Please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are and click on the interpretation icon, the little word icon, and select English as your language. If you're joining on Zoom mobile app, please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. So if you're monolingual English only, please select English. And if you want to do Spanish, please select Spanish and mute the original audio. Now I'm going to say the same thing in Spanish. En un aviso al público, de parte del intérprete, para hacer el uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles y haga clic en el icono de interpretación. Y es un icono de un globo terráqueo. Haga clic en ese icono y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando utilizando la plataforma de Zoom en celular, en la parte de abajo, en los puntos suspensivos, haga clic ahí, después interpretación y después seleccione el idioma en español. And back to you, Sammy.
All right, thank you, Miguel. I think probably if you've tuned into this event, you've got a familiarity of, at least of some kind, with the Salton Sea. It's the largest lake in California, at least by surface area. It's out in the desert, kind of straddling Riverside and Imperial counties. It's been shrinking. It's not a natural lake, at least in its current form. It was created the way we know it today by floodwaters of the Colorado River overflowing levees down in the agricultural area in the Imperial County. And as that area uses less water, as there's demand for more Colorado River water in cities and in other parts of the West, there's less water flowing into the Salton Sea. It's getting hotter, it's drying up. The lake shore is receding. There's this lake bed that has, this kind of dust all over it that may contain, farm pesticides and chemicals that's getting blown into the air that's breathed by people who live near the lake. It's a serious problem. It's something that we've known is coming for a long time, and yet there has not yet been all that much action on the ground to really deal with this in a serious way. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, what's going on at the lake now and what needs to happen next. So our first panelist, we have Secretary Wade Crowfoot here, Secretary of the California Natural Resources Agency. Previously worked in the Jerry Brown administration as well. Secretary Crowfoot, if you want to introduce yourself and make some introductory remarks, go right ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Sammy. So I lead the agency that includes the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, two entities that are really key to the work at the Salton Sea. And our agency is actually charged with working to stabilize and restore the sea, including implementing the Salton Sea Management Plan, which is a commitment to restore 30,000 acres in order to provide for habitat and, critically important, help control dust off the sea. So we're working across a range of projects to get this done. I'm really proud we have 26 team members, many of which are down at the sea, actually working to get these projects done, led by Arturo Delgado, our Assistant Secretary for Salton Sea. I'll be the first one to say we're coming from behind in terms of really historically, the state has not taken the action that we all want to see at the Salton Sea. But I'm excited to talk today about some of our progress and, most importantly, the work ahead of us. Sammy, I think you're on mute.
You're right, I am on mute. I appreciate that. Next, we've got Joaquin Esquivel here, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, also appointed by Governor Newsom to that position and previously worked for Senator Barbara Boxer. Chair Esquivel, tell us about what your agency is doing with the Salton Sea and any other opening comments you'd like to make.
so much, Sammy. Really appreciate being part of this panel. And I apologize. Assemblymember Garcia, can you mute your mic? I think there's a feedback loop happening. Thank you. Sorry. We have incredible challenges certainly down at the sea, and historic ones. As Sammy, you said, there's a lack of the real progress that should have been done for a while now down at the sea. Thankfully, we have a commitment by Governor Newsom and by Secretary Crowfoot here to really make progress, to keep our commitments, importantly, to the communities around the sea. I think sometimes for folks in the Coachella Valley, where I grew up, think of the Eastern Coachella Valley sometimes aren't necessarily, we'll just say, as focused on perhaps big challenges like the Salton Sea. It's a bit far away from Palm Springs. There's a wide, large valley there. But we certainly also shared the resource with the Imperial Valley. And I think there, the challenges obviously in rural communities are oftentimes very different than the challenges we find in our cities and suburbs, where lack of access to even clean water oftentimes here, I think of, again, communities throughout the Eastern Coachella Valley are really compounded by oftentimes these other injustices like the sea that we really need to focus on. And I feel we have a real opportunity to live up to, again, what is really a potential, an incredible potential down at the Salton Sea, given the abundant water resources certainly are there, that even with these transfers that the board oversees, the board adopted these, what is known as a quantification supplement agreement back in 2003 that lead to what are declining inflows to the sea. But even with that, there are still over 500,000 acre feet that are coming down to the sea. I don't mean to just throw that number around, but we oftentimes talk about the challenges we're facing, particularly with drought in our watersheds. And that's just an incredible amount of water that is still there to be put to good use, and particularly projects that protect human health and also ensure that the ecosystems, which have, because of a lack of wetlands and the historic challenges we have there, come to the sea as a last refuge. So I think what is obvious there is a history of inaction. I think back to my time in Senator Boxer's office when I joined as an intern in 2007, where actually my first memo as an intern was around, at then, the real great partnership with Audubon in Washington, D.C., advocating for what was an appropriation through the Water Resources Development Act to the Army Corps. That's still really important now. I think we look and we see where there are opportunities certainly for better, but we do come from a history here of not living up to the expectations of, I think, the communities for sure, but I think California writ large when we talk about the challenges we face.
So I definitely want to follow up on the points both of you have made about the expectations and the follow-up. But to get to our other two panelists, we have Eduardo Garcia here, who's a member of the State Assembly of California, represents the 56th district. His constituents are in Eastern Riverside County and Imperial County as well. Assembly member, tell us what you've been doing on the Salton Sea and what you want to talk about today.
Well, first, good to see you, Sammy. Thank you all for the invitation and to be part of this panel with these great individuals who are working tirelessly to move the needle on the state side. What have I been working on? I see my role kind of two-pronged approach. Aligning the policy that needs to be put in place to move our projects forward. And I'm speaking specifically of the Salton Sea Management Plan. And I'm really excited that the largest project, $200 million of investment, is off the ground. I don't know that many people have realized how significant that project is to the rest of the plans that are part of the management plan. Perimeter Lake, some of the projects that are being discussed in the Desert Shores communities, North Shore communities, extremely important part of the infrastructure. And the second part of what I see as my role is bringing home the money, making sure that we can draw down the necessary resources to be able to implement the Salton Sea Management Plan, which is our 10-year strategic plan of action. Today, we're focused on working with the various agencies to ensure that the community remains engaged. And we've heard a lot from community members that they want to see greater participation and engagement, the outreach. And so I know that we're working closely with the Water Board Chairman, our Secretary of Natural Resources, to put together what could be a plan of action to engage the community that much more in the decision-making process. The second thing is, there's a lot of excitement around the economic opportunities that exist in the sea. And for me, economic driving forces, decisions that are made out there have to include the community for purposes of co-benefits for the people that live in and around the sea. And the lithium discussion, and you've covered it quite well, and the geothermal discussions over the past, Sammy, are back front and center of many discussions, including the electrification of our transportation system and the role that the Salton Sea region can play to that. I see a unique opportunity for our community, the region, and our stakeholders that are driving this discussion through the Lithium Valley Commission to really lead us in a place where we can create some economic opportunities in and around the sea that will contribute to the stabilization and the restoration of the Salton Sea. And so we also are working on some legislation that would ensure that there is a local hire policy in place with community participation if and when this lithium economy out in the sea, it gets off the ground. And so we're thinking forward, and we're working very closely with the members of our community to do so. But for me, two very, not simple, but certainly two tasks that I have. Securing money and bringing it down to the district for this project, this public health crisis that's in front of us, and aligning the public policy in order to move these projects along. And I mean, the list is far longer than that, but I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with all of you today to inform, educate, and of course, hear back from our community in terms of where we need to be as it relates to this issue.
So last but certainly not least, I'm very glad we have Adriana Torres here with us today, who is definitely not from the government, which is a good perspective to have on this panel. Adriana lives in North Shore, along the shore of the Salton Sea. She's a graduating senior at Desert Mirage High School this year, and she's been working with Alianza and with the Youth Leadership Institute to advocate for fellow young people living along the lake. Adriana, tell us about yourself and tell us about how you got involved with working on this issue of the Salton Sea.
Yeah, so hey everyone, my name is Adriana. You gave me a pretty good startup. But yeah, I'm a youth advocate, just trying to see what I can do for my community and my family. But I got started in the work like back in freshman year. I got introduced through YOSE and like Alianza and the Youth Organizing Council here at my school and my community. And I just found it really interesting, and I want to see what I can do to help my family and my community.
You know, Adriana, let me follow up, and if you don't mind my starting with you here and put you on the spot just a little bit. What is it? I mean, tell us a little bit about what it's like living in North Shore, specifically with regards to the lake, and just what the air is like there, and what your experience has been, sort of actually interacting with the sea on a daily basis, which I think is not something the rest of us can say.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's just like a lot of cases with the increased number of residents dealing with asthma compared to like the rest of the nation. In the community, most people here know at least 3 to 4 other residents who suffer with asthma. And because there's no like nearby hospital, or like the nearest hospital is like 35 to 40 miles away, or like there's no asthma centers to really help the community understand like how the air is affecting their health, I feel like there's kind of like a lack of information for the community about our health. And for me, it would be really great to see more information being spread and more like to the people of the community, especially in Spanish, or just in just a friendlier way that we could all understand.
There are a lot of people who, remember what the Salton Sea was like, back in the heyday. It always gets talked about the 50s and 60s. It was this resort and it was beautiful. And, obviously in your experience and in my own lifetime as well, that's not something that we've ever seen. Do you have any thought, Adriana, on what you would want to see it look like or be like in the future? That, is that something that you think about at all, or is that just not what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, I hope it could be a safe environment. My fear is that like it'll dry up, and then just like the surrounding communities will just become inhabitable. So we just wouldn't be able to live here anymore. And we kind of just see like our homes turn into like wasteland and stuff. That's like my fear. And I hope that we can find like a long-term solution to the Salton Sea so that our like future generations can also enjoy its beauty. Because for me, I think it's a really beautiful place. I like driving up through the mountains and just the hills. It's really beautiful. And I think it just embodies the beauty that our community holds, but also just the lack of attention and care that we sometimes have received. And yeah, I hope that we can turn like the surrounding areas. I hope we can put in like more recreational spaces or just more amenities for the community that we lack a lot of. Yeah.
So I think that's, I mean, that's, and I'll circle back to you before we finish, Adriana, but I think that's a good pivot point to return to Secretary Crowfoot and Chair Esquivel here. I mean, you both spoke about how, you know, we're behind, you know, there's a lot more that needs to be done more quickly. I mean, you know, even as of, you know, the targets that were set a few years ago about how much lake bed, you know, we wanted to have, you know, covered up by now in terms of dust suppression, and these habitat creation projects were, you know, already pretty woefully behind on just, you know, the short-term targets. And I mean, I've been following Red Hill Bay. You know, this was supposed to be the first major, you know, sort of shallow wetlands habitat and dust suppression project. They broke ground in 2015. I was there that day. It's been 6 years. As far as I'm aware, that project is still not especially close to being finished. Representatives Ruiz and Vargas from the Congress sent, you know, letters to the feds and to Imperial Irrigation District about this last week, basically asking what's going on, why is this not done? What is going, I mean, I know this isn't necessarily the state of California's project here, but I would pose this to both of you. What's going on? Why is it so hard to get something actually built on the ground there? And, you know, should we be worried that this is a sign that, you know, meeting these much more ambitious targets is going to be, you know, even harder than this?
Sammy, it's a fair question, and I'll recognize that if you're, you know, we've heard from so many residents living around the sea, just a real skepticism on whether, you know, any governmental agency will actually make progress, visible, helpful progress at the sea, because of a situation like with the Red Hill Bay project. Just backing up a little bit, I think the scale and the complicated nature of the problem were frankly paralyzing for the state government for a very long time. And there was the recognition that with the transfer of water, which meant less inflow into the sea, there would be major challenges. But it wasn't until, boy, just a handful of years ago that the state agencies took it upon themselves to say, okay, we need a plan. And that plan, well, developed, there's the task force that developed the Salton Sea management plan. And then the water board went one step further to essentially require our agency to hold us accountable for actually meeting that plan. And that Salton Sea management plan is a 10-year plan. And as I mentioned, the focus is on 30,000 acres of dust suppression and restored habitat. These projects are terribly complicated because of the questions around the hydrology, the inflows into the lake, also the varied ownership of the sea. Many agencies actually own the sea. So planning these projects so that they actually do what they intend to do without impacting others, whether they're local farmers or communities, takes a long time. I'm really, really proud of the fact that we're moving forward on the 4,000-acre species conservation habitat project at the mouth of the New River. That's what Assemblymember Garcia referred to. I think your point is well taken about Red Hill Bay. That continues to be a challenging project that the federal agency is working to implement on, as I understand it, partially on IID land. And so there are a lot of complicated points of difference that are being navigated right now on that project. I can say, though, that our focus on species conservation habitat is to demonstrate on the ground that we can get projects done at the sea. We've got folks from Imperial County actually at work developing the project today, actually out on site. And so that demonstrates that we move forward. We can move forward. Frankly, though, we have to move forward on multiple projects at once. I'm really excited about the Desert Shores project, which Assemblymember Garcia identified. This is to get water back into the canals in the Desert Shore community for the livability of that community. We broke through, made really good progress thanks to Supervisor Kelly, Imperial County, Matt Desert, Pollution Control District, Assemblymember Garcia. Also, another project we're focused on is in the North Lake, which is critical to our communities like North Lake in the coast up in Riverside County. We're working on a North Lake demonstration project in partnership with Riverside County. We're really excited to be more closely partnering what's called the Salton Sea Authority, which is a body comprised of elected officials from across the region, led by a great new leader, Patrick O'Dowd. And they're focused on actually driving many of these projects, leading on many of these projects, including North Lake demonstration project. So Sammy, I think I never argue when people say, look, there's been broken promises, there's been not enough movement. I say, agreed. Totally agree. Our focus now every day is to make demonstrable progress. We have to catch up to those acreage goals. Simply put, the regulator, Joaquin's board, is focused on holding us accountable for getting to those targets. So while we're coming from behind, we do have a plan in place to catch up to those acreage targets. But at the end of the day, for communities like the one Adriana lives in, the proof is in the pudding to actually see the changes at the sea, and that's what we're focused on.
Let me follow up with Chair Esquivel here. As the Secretary mentioned, it's your agency that's really responsible for enforcing this stuff. I mean, it was, your agency was involved with the quantification settlement agreement way back when. At least in my experience covering the sea, which dates back to 2014, it seems like, a lot of the momentum that we have today started when the Imperial Irrigation District essentially threatened that, if something wasn't done to fulfill the promise to fix the sea, that they were going to, stop transferring that water to San Diego and to Los Angeles, or at least that would be a question again. I mean, this gets into this is all, part of this larger Colorado River, basin issue and the politics of that and the shrinking supply with climate change. Do you think is it appropriate for the people who live in these communities and for the folks in Imperial to, sort of hold that up as a threat or a bargaining chip, and to hold that over, your heads, and to continue to say, you've got to get this done or we're going to cause a real problem? And if not, how should they be, working to hold your agency and other state agencies accountable?
Yeah, thank you, Sammy. You go back to the history, certainly, and 2003 was a very different water decision-making space. That was 20 years ago. And I think what the lesson learned from that is you can't kick the can down the road. In 2003, what was done for political expediency was a 15-year ticket to just, blank check for that period. And ultimately, it didn't yield better solutions. It needed to be decided when the transfers happen themselves, and we sort of have the landscape we have now. And I think the importance is certainly that those transfers are critical to California. They keep us within our compact rights. We're here to be good partners on the river. There are incredible challenges. You look at this drought that we're in, this extreme drought that I was just part of some conversations of this morning in congressional panels. We're seriously challenged, and we know that we don't have enough to meet, it seems, our current needs, let alone with climate change and increased drought, what the future may hold. And that includes the sea. The sea is hydrologically connected to the Colorado River. Those waters that go and feed this habitat and this incredible resource are part of a complex system. So we have to keep good by our commitments to stay within the compact. And it means that we need to figure out how we're going to be managing the sea of the future. I think we have here certainly a 10-year path, or ticking down now. But importantly, we need to shift to what are those long-term solutions for the sea, or at least the long-term vision, some certainty around its inflows, particularly for these projects that we are building. And there, I know the Natural Resources Agency is in the middle of beginning to scope that out, just that. But it's so critical that we focus on these actual projects that were contemplated to be pilot projects when all this was, when the preferred alternative the state selected in 2007 first came out. Again, there is a lot already there. Sometimes I know the criticism is, oh, well, you've overstudied the sea, or it's, the scale and scope of the challenges at the sea, the science there is actually a real critical component of all this work, because the sea is not the only body of water that throughout the West that will, I think of the Great Salt Lakes, I think of other habitat throughout the West that are similarly challenged. And I think that we can be a laboratory and a leader if we really start to put the dollars, going back to the Assembly members' points, and commitment to get these projects done. But we have incredible complexity in land ownership alone in this, this geography that's 35 miles by 15 miles, the largest body of water in the state by surface area. So it's gonna require us to learn some of those lessons from the past, not kick the can down the road further, because it won't get any easier in the years ahead with climate change barreling down on all us in these systems.
So I want to get to the long-term vision that you referred to in a minute here, but on the topic of those dollars and Assemblymember Garcia, the Desert Sun, a great newspaper that I used to work for, reported last month, and I have it on my screen here, that of the $374.8 million that had been authorized for the Salton Sea Management Program, that as of October, only $56 million had been spent. So, I mean, Assembly member, you talked about how part of your job is to bring in the money, and it seems like there is more and more money, and there's another big chunk that's proposed in the governor's revised budget that came out this month. What can you be doing, or what should others be doing to make sure that this money is not just getting allocated, which seems to be increasingly less of a problem, and actually getting spent?
Yeah, well, I think we need to have real talk here. And the real talk is that the local agencies, along with state agencies, need to do a better job in coordinating our planning and permitting processes. The fact is that that's the same issue that's taking place at the Red Hill Bay Marina. And that was one of the biggest issues that the state had with some of the local agencies in order to get this project off the ground. That's really where we're losing a lot of time, energy being spent, and quite frankly, the longer we wait, the higher cost the projects will be. And so we need to really hunker down and get on the same page with our local agencies. And this is a message to IID, Imperial County, our air quality districts, as well as our state agencies, that we need to make sure that we're putting the threats that are in existence, these public health and ecological threats that are before us, that we all talk about consistently, and make sure that we get to the common places so that we can execute these projects. It almost seems like securing the money is getting easier than getting these projects off the ground. And for many years, getting the money was the hardest part for any effort along the Salton Sea. I'm excited. This governor has done more than any other governor since I've been here in the Assembly, 6 years now, to put forward his commitment in resources to be able to get these projects off the ground. And I'm excited to see that the budget has $240+ million proposed. We too have put forward a climate resiliency bond that has a very similar amount tied to the Salton Sea. And there we are hoping to continue to implement the management plan. I don't know that there are that many issues around the policy aspects of what needs to happen. I think the management plan outlines clearly where we need to be, by what time. And as it's been already admitted, we are behind, but we are in an accelerated mode to catch up, and working with the local communities to ensure that the next set of projects are within proximity of where people live. I think that's extremely important, not just for the optical aspects of it, but because of the impact it will have directly to people, creating an opportunity for the things that Adriana mentioned, the recreational opportunities, the economic opportunities. Those are critical as we look forward to making these large investments coming from the state. Now, one thing that I need to mention as well is that we need our federal government partners to step up. There is no question that they have a huge responsibility here. We have a great congressman on the north side and the south side of the sea, but quite frankly, we're yet to see action and resources make their way to the community for purposes of making sure that we can continue to expand the 10-year plan that is focused around public health mitigation and eco-habitat restoration. I mean, this isn't a call out. This is simply saying, we need your help. We need to collaborate. We need to work closer together, because the community are all waiting for us to really take strong action on this issue.
Adriana, two follow-up questions here for you after hearing what our other panelists have had to say. I mean, one, do you have, folks coming to you in North Shore from, the state government or local government, and actually, in your community, asking about what your needs are and what you want to see? And two, is there anything that, I guess, what would you want to hear or see at this point that would actually convince you that, the state of California really, cares about this and cares about getting it right? Is there something that would really make you feel like they're moving in the right direction and actually trying to help?
Yeah, so I'd love to see maybe a minimum of quarterly informational community meetings or something. Because we've had our own community meetings with just community members and other community members explaining the projects and stuff, but we never had people that are supposed to be making the changes for the betterment in our communities actually be in those spaces and like talk to us and explain that. So I feel like that would be really cool, like if we can have like a space for community members, lawmakers, and also like researchers to give information and input and updates on the current projects and the future of the Salton Sea. I feel like the space should also be like community led and just very supportive so that community members feel appreciated and listened to when they're speaking. And yeah, they should, and like the lawmakers should take into account the community's input, guidance, and direction for like the future of the building of the solutions for the Salton Sea.
I saw Joaquin taking notes there as you spoke, so hopefully this is getting across here to the rest of the panel. We've gotten some questions from other reporters and from members of the audience. Question from Angela Chen at KESQ, who has several questions here. One of which is about what is the state's long-term plan for the Salton Sea, and just to add to this a little here, my understanding is that this is something that's there's study happening around. I think there was a consultant just hired to study the idea of, or the possibility of importing water from I guess either the Gulf of California or the I guess potentially the Pacific. I don't know if that's really in the cards as part of that study. But what does long-term planning look like, and how is the state thinking that through? And I guess this is probably either for the secretary or Chair Esquivel here.
Yeah, I'm glad to take this one. So the Salton Sea management plan that we're talking about, that's really the sort of the roadmap to do these projects. It's a near to midterm strategic plan, really focused on stabilizing as much of the sea as possible over the next 10 years. To your point, Sammy, though, then the question is, what's the long-term future for the sea? We need to be focused on actually a durable future for the sea, for the residents around the sea, and also the animals that depend on the sea. So we've engaged the University of California to coordinate an independent analysis of several proposals to import water into the Salton Sea from other locations, including the Sea of Cortez and the Southern California recycled water. There's big open questions around whether those are feasible from an engineering perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And there's been good, smart, creative people working on those solutions. And I do believe that they deserve to be analyzed in detail to identify if we can actually import water into the Salton Sea. There's obviously attractive benefit if we are able to do so, because that would reduce the shrinking of the sea. But we also need to analyze a future if water importation is not feasible. And that includes what do we do at the sea if we have simply the inflow from the existing watersheds. Before the transfer of water that was called the QSA, there was about 1.3 million acre feet of water inflowing into the sea. Since the transfer occurred, it's dipped down to about 1 million acre feet. And then future projections are suggesting 850,000 acre feet or less of just projected inflows without importation. So our long-term plan that we're developing over the next year will identify, one, if any of the importation projects are potentially feasible, and then two, if they are, obviously, then what's the next step? If they're not, then how are we going to prioritize the water that continues to flow into the sea? We need to suppress the dust, recognizing that the region is already challenged with air quality problems not related to the sea. We need to, inundate as much of the sea as possible. And then where we can't inundate the sea, put best available control measures, which is essentially a fancy way to say measures that are actually going to capture the dust, like vegetation, onto those areas that aren't inundated. So what we need to do as our agency is continue to make progress on the midterm plan, and that's all those projects, but then deliver a long-term plan for consideration by Assemblymember Garcia and other leaders that really points us in a trajectory of ensuring the durable future for the sea, whether that's water importation or not.
Let me ask one follow-up here. We another question that Angela from KESQ post here is if you could please address the criticism of the lead author of this or the lead researcher on this ocean water import study. And to be honest with you, I have not vetted this, so I don't know this for a fact, but we've got several commenters in the chat here suggesting that this is an academic who's already on the record and in some format as being opposed to the idea of seawater imports. So if you could address that, I think that's something people want to hear about.
Sure. So as I said, we did a competitive process to identify an institution that would coordinate an independent panel of experts to assess all of these projects. The institution that was selected was the University of California at Santa Cruz. It won't be the academics from Santa Cruz that are assessing the projects for feasibility. As I understand it, it's going to be an independent panel of different experts across disciplines, hydrology, infrastructure, financing, et cetera. But UC Santa Cruz will coordinate that panel. And one of the academic leaders that would be participating or coordinating that panel, Dr. Haddad, Brent Haddad, as I understand it, had written an op-ed about 20 years ago on the future of the Salton Sea, at least from the vantage point of that moment in time. And in that, there was, well, boy, it was 20 years ago, so very different understanding of what's possible at the sea. When we learned about that op-ed 2 decades ago, our folks had a conversation with Dr. Haddad to make sure that, given all that's evolved in the over the last 20 years, if he could actually participate in the project, being open-minded to whatever solution we ultimately pursue for the long-term health of the sea, whether that's water importation or not. And Dr. Haddad, being obviously an academic and that's analyzing evolving information, et cetera, told us, of course he could. But that being said, ultimately it's this independent panel that will assess the feasibility of these importation projects. Ultimately, that report will be publicly accessible, transparent analysis, and then that will inform our decision making. Ultimately, it's the state agencies overseen by our legislative leaders that are making the decisions on the future of the projects or the future of the sea. But that UC process and that independent analysis by those experts is going to be really critical to shaping this long-term plan.
Let me open up this long-term discussion to Chair Escobar and Assemblymember Garcia. I mean, I feel like when I started reporting on the Salton Sea, mid last decade, that most of the attitude that I saw from government about this, C2C import type idea, keep it at its current size was fairly dismissive, and there was a view that this was just not something that was feasible, even though it was something a lot of people wanted. What do you guys think? I mean, is this something that either of you see as a serious possibility for the Salton Sea, or is this something that's being entertained now that ultimately is going to get dismissed because it's not feasible?
Assemblymember, do you want to start, or I can?
Look, I'll share this with you, is that we've been open to the water importation conversation from the get-go, but in conversations that I've had with the many individuals who have submitted proposals, the price tags vary significantly from here to here, and that's concerning. The other is, with the limited amount of resources that have been secured to go towards the Salton Sea Management Plan that has a blueprint and that's now off the ground, it's very difficult to move in a direction that's unknown and spend some of those resources versus on something that we know has been discussed and will address the public health, air quality issues, and the ecohabitat restoration components. And so that's been one of the kind of push and pull conversations that have happened as it relates to resources moving in the direction of the importation discussion. The last point I'll make is that, we work very closely with legislators in the Mexican side of government in Baja, and also with representatives from the federal government. And any and every time a conversation about water importation, cutting through international territories, crossing international boundaries has presented itself, it's not always been a conversation that has been pleasantly embraced. And these are decision makers that represent Baja California and the state legislature, as well as representatives from the federal government. So that tells me that there is a lot of complications and a lot of work to be had as it relates to getting to a specific place where we can then say water importation from the south is the best approach. Or for that matter, water importation from the west coast boundaries is one of the best approaches that we can take. There's no question that we need a water source in order to sustain the sea as we see it, no pun intended, today, and how most folks envision it going back 30 years in terms of the activities that we all envision happening once again. But the Secretary has really outlined how we are approaching this and how we have kind of a plan A and a plan B in the case that the water importation conversation does not fall through.
Yeah, I'll say, there's ways that it sounds very elegant, right? Quite like a silver bullet solution. Just bring in more water from the ocean. It's so close. It can be gravity fed. I've heard, and through my years of engagement on the sea, look through what is a lot of discussion I know around it, dating back to when reclamation through the Salton Sea, Sonny Bono Salton Sea Restoration Act. It was Newt Gingrich that was on the shores of the Salton Sea, there in 1999, promising to fix the sea. And reclamation did a good amount of work and study around pipe in and pipe out and what are the issues. And there are salinity challenges with bringing salt water down to the sea. You will have to have, and I've heard folks say, well, that's how you'll desal it. Well, that is going to require then disposal of brines. So again, what is the net benefit to the sea? What is the actual art of the possible? What is technically, 21st century, yes, feasible here, but still rooted in reality? And I think that's where, I'll just say, I know Resources Agency had a hard time in their first go around finding someone to do the analysis around some of these things. So I'm glad UC Santa Cruz is there. I don't see an op-ed from 2002 as somehow disqualifying at all, knowing that there'll be a robust public process around it. And hopefully we can all then have a common vision, because I know this hangs out there as the more ideal solution in some folks' minds, and means to Assembly members' point, we can be a little distracted from the actual solutions that we need to be pursuing now, which we know we can, and continue to maximize the water that's even there at the sea, being used on a watershed basis through Imperial County. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit still yet there before, again, to the Assembly members' point, we undertake what would be decadal effort to work with Mexico, do the international work, but also ensure that we're doing best for the long term for the sea, and not just creating more challenges by importing salt in.
I got to tell you, when I was at the Desert Sun, I went through a lot of old file art on the Salton Sea, and I never did see that picture of Newt Gingrich down there at the South Shore. I'd love to check that out. That's kind of nuts.
I imagine CNN must have something, because there must be some footage somewhere.
Yeah. One point that several of you brought up earlier, in fact, I'm forgetting who exactly brought it up, but the, lithium and geothermal, and the possibility for the, the southern end of the Salton Sea to, host new geothermal plants, which could be really important from an energy perspective, and for those plants to produce large quantities of lithium, which is this key ingredient for electric car batteries and energy storage on the power grid. Adriana, I'm curious here, just because this is something that I've written a lot about. When you hear people like the other panelists talking about, oh, there's going to be jobs and economic activity from this energy and lithium stuff on the other end of the lake, I'm just curious, is that something that means anything to you, or sounds of interest or exciting to you, or does that feel like somehow a sideshow? I'm just kind of interested what you make of that.
I feel like it is interesting, like a possibility, but I'd also like to see just the community work, and just still kind of getting those amenities, basic amenities for the community, and still trying to help the community there. But the idea does sound interesting.
I think it was it was Assemblymember Garcia who earlier in our conversation you mentioned that you'd want to see a local hire requirement. Could you talk a little bit more about how this stuff intercepts with actually providing these amenities and improved life improve quality of living, and also just how it interacts with Salton Sea restoration and whether it can play a role in making that happen.
Absolutely. So I'll start off by acknowledging the work of the Lithium Valley Commission that is chaired by Silvia Paz, who is the executive director of Alianza, who is doing tremendous work in the engagement outreach aspect of the work happening at the Salton Sea. The commission is made up of a number of other local community stakeholders, representatives from the EJ community, the Audubon Society, and labor. We have people from the community that are looking out for the best interest of the people who live in and around the sea if this lithium economy gets off the ground. I will share with you that there is a lot of excitement, not just regionally, statewide, but across the country when it comes to the alignment that's happening with this new federal administration that wants to push Buy America and make products in America that align with our aggressive renewable and climate goals of our country and of the state. And what a unique position we find ourselves in, where we have one of the largest deposits of this important mineral that it will be needed for purposes of storing energy, for grid reliability. It's a conversation that came up just the other day when we were talking about summer heat waves and fires up and down the state that impact our grid system and storage capacity issues that come from, again, the development of lithium minerals. The car goals and objectives of 5 million cars by 2035, 250 plus electrification stations up and down the state of California to meet those electric vehicle demands. They all require energy and clean energy. And so we're connecting the dots and saying, we've got the clean energy production at the Salton Sea. We've got the mineral that is as a byproduct that can supply the electric vehicle and storage needs of the state, and quite frankly, of the nation and possibly the world, given that the amount of lithium on the Salton Sea, in the Salton Sea region, is far greater than what you find in places like China, Australia, and Chile. This is a huge deal for our community. This Lithium Valley Commission gets to play a critical role in what I call establishing the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement meaning, how does this happen? Who does this happen to benefit? And that ultimately there is a cyclical reinvestment that goes back into Salton Sea sustainability, restoration, and possibly even help fund future projects out in that area. And how does that happen? By the community, the elected bodies out there that would be approving these projects, set up some type of community benefit fund on a reoccurring basis to be able to see all of these investments come to fruition. And so I'm excited about it, the opportunities that this presents for our region. I know that many times the words game changer is used to describe these circumstances. This truly could be transformational for the entire region, for the state, and possibly for the nation. We heard the federal representatives talking about this at the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, who are also making investments in domestication of lithium in California. This is a big deal, and I'm just glad that the community members are at the table helping shape this discussion and bringing in other community members to be part of the discussion.
So on that point about the community, we've gotten several audience questions on this. A couple of similar ones here. One listener on Facebook asks, how can the general public play a better role in helping to tackle this crisis? And another asks, how can small grassroots groups help? Assemblymember or others, if you want to weigh in on that, I think people are interested. Oh, and Assemblymember, when you're not speaking, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself for the echo.
Amy, I'll take a quick shot at answering that question. I mean, I think we have improved the level of engagement with community members and groups, but we have a long way to go. And so it's very much a work in progress. We had a whole number of community engagement committees. Frankly, it was too many to handle and move projects forward. So we consolidated that in a community engagement committee last year. That went some of the way. We started a regular listserv newsletter, provide information, but we've heard from community groups and leaders that we have to do more. We have to do more to actually, to Adriana's point, really get in the community so that we're listening and learning from people on terms of their needs and making sure that we're communicating in ways that are understandable, obviously bilingual. So at the Assembly members' urging, we've got some plans in the works to really try to figure out how do we increase that community engagement so that people that want to help, whether they're just regular individuals in the community or part of a grassroots group, are actually going to be engaged. So I'm guardedly optimistic that, you know, in the next several months, the communities down there will feel and see and experience more engagement from our state team.
Sort of a related question. You know, we have someone on Facebook who asks, the plight of the Salton Sea is not only a local issue. Many of us in Southern California and other concerned citizens from outside the area wonder who is actually in charge. And I think the twist that I'll put on that, just, you know, based on our conversation, is, you know, you all have referenced there, you know, a million different agencies involved in this, you know, state, federally, and locally. You know, for people who, you know, want to get engaged with this, who haven't been, or who want to figure out how to get engaged, who should they be focused on holding accountable? How does someone get involved, and where do they focus that effort? You know, considering that it's, you know, like you said, it's kind of all over the place, and that's open to whoever wants to address that.
Well, I'll claim some accountability, which is our agency is charged to implement the Salton Sea management plan and put these projects in place. And so at the end of the day, the buck stops with us and with me. Joaquin and, you know, Chair Esquivel is a great partner, and he's also the regulator that's working to hold us accountable. We have great partners on the ground, for what it's worth, in both counties, Riverside County, Imperial County, the Air Pollution Control District down there, the Salton Sea Authority, IID. So, Sammy, it is a complicated area of sort of local, state, federal agency overlap, a lot of landowners on the sea. So anytime you do a project, you actually need to get permission from a landowner. The state owns very little land. But at the end of the day, you know, I'll claim responsibility at the state level. That progress is on our shoulders. And we're working to try to centralize the information. So if you just Google, you know, Salton Sea Natural Resources Agency, you'll go onto our Salton Sea management page. You can sign up for the newsletter and stay in touch that way.
Yeah, the Water Board, through our stipulated order that we adopted, has a yearly check-in, but that's not nearly frequency enough for the work and discussions that are going on. So it really is the great leadership that Secretary Crowfoot and the Resources Agency and DWR and the Fish and Wildlife Agency, their sub-agencies, are doing on the ground. And what we're trying to best do is have more one-stop sort of discussions where both state and federal and local agencies are in one place at one time, having discussions with the community, so that there isn't this feeling of sort of whack-a-mole amongst the community engagement, because we know how important people's time is and how confusing it could be trying to engage on something so huge a scale, as we talked about, with so many overlapping federal, state, and local authorities. But we want to clean those out, have a focused discussion, and better drive what's really an opportunity for a common vision amongst us. And so the board's here to do our part and our role. And I think that's in part helping sort of minimize what are those differences and really keep our discussion focused around the possibility and potential for and the need for a better future down at the sea for us and our communities.
I'd like to chime in just a bit and tell you that, you know, Natural Resources Agency certainly is playing a key role in the implementation of the Salton Sea Management Plan. You know, our role in the legislature, aside from, you know, securing the funding and aligning the policy, is to continue to inform and educate the colleagues up and down the state of California that this is a state issue, that this is a statewide liability issue that goes back to 2003. And I got to tell you, that does not get very easy up here, given all of the different interests. I mean, I have colleagues that would love to get $240 million in the budget for a project in their district. And they see that as Eduardo or Senator Wessel, who represents the area, is getting a $40 million allocation for a special project. But this isn't a special project. This is a statewide liability that we have, and we have to continue to hit that hard in order for us to continue to advocate to bring down the resources. I had another colleague recently tell me, hey, I got to see that in the May revise, Salton Sea is getting another couple $100 million allocation. What is it at now? A couple billion now since you've been in the legislature? And I said, it's far from that. And until we are gone from the legislature, we're going to keep advocating for that type of money to be invested, because the problem is far greater than one allocation, certainly far greater than one 10-year management plan. And that's what we're talking about, right? What does the future look like? And right now, our job is to secure those dollars and keep those projects moving, the projects that will benefit the communities in which Adriana has spoken for very eloquently here today. And that's the mission. And so the state, until we see others step up to the plate in the magnitude that the state has over the last 6 years, we will continue to take the lead on this effort and be proud of the work that's being done and that's yet to be done, turning the Salton Sea into an economic, vibrant, community that is healthy for the people who have been there for a long time, looking at this body of water and wondering, when will we see something happen out here?
As we wrap up here, Adriana, I think I wanted to end this with you. You've sort of addressed this, already, but I think I want to ask this specifically for people who don't, live by the Salton Sea, who don't live in, Eastern Riverside County or Imperial County, which is most of the state of California. And when we talk about the federal government's role, that's, the vast majority of the people in the country. Why should all those folks care about what's going on at the Salton Sea? I mean, I guess particularly in California, what would be the message that you would want to share about why, even if you don't live there and don't plan to spend any time there, this is something that you should be concerned about or should want to be resolved?
Yeah, well, I think this isn't just like a local health hazard, it's a collective health hazard. And I think that we need to find the solutions collectively with like lawmakers and community residents and all the people in California, because eventually it's a matter of time where it affects all of us. And I think it's just really important that we realize that.
Well, I hope you don't mind our other panelists if we let that be the closing thought here. Thank you, everybody, for this great conversation, and to the audience for attending. I'll just end as a journalist. If you live in the desert, subscribe to the Desert Sun and support journalism on this topic. Out in LA, we do hopefully an okay job at the LA Times too. Thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.